So the elusive other changes, there's various bits and pieces that are changed in Part 21. And we are listing a few of them here. Ultimately, I'm sorry for you guys, but ultimately you will have to read every single change, every word change. You have to go through it, make it your own, make up your own mind what the consequences for you are as a DOA, make the necessary amendments. Just to highlight a few of them that we feel are important. We'll look at 21A33, where we've made some amendments. Issuance of TC and RTC already touched on yesterday. Permit to fly for maintenance check. Then my colleague will take over and discuss Cape 10 implementation, and I think, Michael, you'll do the overall picture. On inspections and tests, 21A33. We are more precise on what we expect you to do on recording of the compliance demonstration created under point 33C. And we're expecting a statement of conformity. I don't think many of you do not already produce that. It's common business to do it like this. We have required it, of course, when the agency came to witness a test. We needed statements. This just makes sure that you do it for every test. You produce a statement of conformity which says the test specimen, the test setup, and the measuring equipment is conform the test plan. And it should list any non-conformities for which you will provide a justification that the non-conformity will not affect the test. Also, that is a normal way of business, I think. In ideal cases, you'll produce prototype parts that you put up for test, and they are exactly according to what you expect them to be. Real life is different. There will always be some changes. You have to analyze the differences of the part produced with the anticipated part, and if it's still possible to do the test, you have to demonstrate that those changes, there might be a color change that does not affect at all the outcome of the test, but you have to provide that justification for all tests. Whether we witness them or not is irrelevant. This has to be produced, and we made it more precise. Like I said, I think most of you are already doing this. Sure. Could you wait for the microphone, please?
Okay. You tell us that the applicant shall issue the statement of conformity. In our DOA, it is usually the production organization, the POA. He is responsibility for manufacturing the test articles, the test samples, accordance with our design data, and he's issuing the statement of conformity, not the applicant.
Okay.
Is this acceptable for EASA?
No. That's the short answer. I will explain as well. So there's two aspects to this. First of all, we talk about applicant. We're in subpart B. So in the TC section, other parts do refer to this one. So if you do a test for STC, etc., but also for minor change. So that may be something that is still needs more precision from our side. When you mentioned yesterday, Michael, when you said we want to be clear, when we use applicant, we mean applicant. In this case, within the confines of subpart B, it is an applicant. There's no privilege to do a TC yet. But it has to be understood as the design organization in this purpose. So yes, of course, if you have your test articles produced by a production organization, they are able to provide you with a conformity statement, ideally a Form 1 non-approved data. It is for you to take that data and put it on your conformity statement, the statement of conformity mentioned here, assuring yourself that that is that it is the correct part. But also the statement of conformity needs to include the test setup and calibration data, etc. Yeah, so and that's the only thing that's the only The DOA is the only one in position to make that statement. So of course it's very good to rely on the data produced by the production organization, but it's not enough. Also not for the test article. You basically make the match between the test article you receive from the production organization, preferably with a Form 1 unapproved data, might be a COC of another organization as well, and then you marry that with the test plan. Just an added note that we've been talking a lot about LOI. Okay, could you switch on the microphone?
Does this work? Much better. Okay. Quick question. Francesco Finzi-Concini from Part-21. So how would a DOA be able to use data from a past engineering test to support a change in the future?
The guidance material will tell you when you can do that. Basically, you have to assure yourself that if past test data has been produced, you are able to make, or that statement of conformity was made at that time, and you can trust that data, but you have to make that match. It can be quite tricky to do it. So if you have past data for which you are unable to assure yourself as DOA that the test specimen, the test setup, and the measuring equipment is conform with the test plan, you will not be able to use that data, and you have to redo the test.
I would mean was conform at the time, but I can make the finding later in the future. That's what you're saying?
Definitely, if that data is available, you have to analyze the data. But if that's the case, then for sure, of course, you can do that. Then it's a valid test result. We just need to make sure that everything was conforming to what it should be, so that we can rely on the test result.
So fundamentally, traceability on the hardware and traceability on the instrumentation setup and calibrations of the probes used. Fundamentally, that's what you're looking for.
Fundamentally, yes.
That's what I would.
Be careful if you have some kind of, I'm being particularly vague here, certificate of conformity from a organization. What's the validity of the document? If from the past you have a Form 1 unapproved data, no questions asked. Yeah, it comes from a known entity, a production organization that is able and recognized to be able to establish conformity. From a different organization, you have to assure yourself that the basis for producing such a statement of conformity is the correct one.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Can I add something? No?
Stefano.
You also have to cross-check with the level of involvement. So if for that test the level of involvement lately by EASA was, yes, we want to witness, this might be a reason why you have to redo the test.
Thanks, Stefano. Yeah.
In case of flying parts, so parts that should be installed in a prototype aircraft, that means that the design organization should take the responsibility for the conformity of the part signing over an already issue as a Form 1 for with non-approved data. In theory, in your idea, who should take this responsibility? Who should sign this statement of conformity in your idea? The CVE, the head of design organization, the airworthiness functions? Because it's endorsing something and taking also responsibility that are normally not taken.
Well, it should be normal to take this responsibility already in the past. But I don't think you're hinting at that, so I take it like that. So the rule doesn't state who should do this. So it's up to you as a design organization to determine that. In many cases, we've seen that the CVE makes this statement. I'm not a big fan of that. Like we said, we don't specify who does that, but the CVE should be independently verifying all data In this case, the CVE would be creating data, so it impedes on the independence. But there's no black and white on this one. Yeah. So just to make the statement, you brought up a good point. Suppose you're doing a ground test or a flight test on an aircraft in which a prototype installation is built. The DOA is responsible to make the statement of conformity, but of course is relying on others to make the modifications. The DOA will not quickly modify the aircraft themselves, only in very special cases. If you're installing an STC, that would be quite dangerous. You only want the 145 touching the aircraft ultimately, so you would need to rely on a statement similar to the Form 1 non-approved data from the POA, to have a statement from the 145 that they have installed all the equipment as per the instructions from the DOA. Yeah, so that's what we're looking for. And then the test specimen, which in this case is rather big, is a full aircraft, conforms to the test plan. Any other questions? Okay. Just a statement that our ability to review such data has no direct link with LOI. Of course, there's the link that we potentially want to witness certain tests, but the review of the data and the relationship to the compliance test, the demonstration is not directly linked to the LOI. Usually, it will be us as DOA team leaders that review such data later on, for instance. One new AMC has been produced to 21A33, providing additional details, as just discussed, and the guidance material that was already existing for 33D has been changed as a result. It's along the lines I've just explained to you. Please read it carefully, but we don't want to go into the detail of this material at this stage. This is the last slide on the particularities of 21A33 change. Last call for questions before I move on.
Very quick one.
Okay.
Date that this takes effect, is it March 2020?
Yes. 23rd.
23rd of March next year.
23rd of March, yes. Issuance of TC, RTC, this is basically a repeat from yesterday, so I'll be quick. But it's never bad to repeat certain things. So issuance of the TC, RTC, now the requirements have been put in the appropriate place, which in section B of Part 21 under the paragraphs that are listed. So we will issue the certificate when you have complied with all the applicable section A requirements. We have confirmed that compliance in accordance with LOI, so 21B100. And now for the TC and RTC, but also for all the other changes, we make this clear that you also have to add the statement that no feature or characteristic has been identified, and that's the change in wording we have there that was explained yesterday, that may make the product unsafe for the users for which certification has been requested. So has been identified, yesterday it was mentioned, we're all human beings. So what we don't know we can't write down. We have to make every effort to make sure that it does not have any feature or characteristics, but you need to be able to identify them. And that was the old wording. Any questions on this one? The next topic is on permit to fly for maintenance check flights. So remember, Michael yesterday mentioned that there were 3 opinions triggering changes into Part 21. This is the second one. particular rulemaking task that is a lot larger than just Part-21. Rule changes have been made in OPS regulation and some AMC and guidance material in the CAMO regulation. This is not the forum to discuss all these detailed changes, why maintenance check flights were in this opinion and why the changes were made. This is just for the consequences we see in Part-21. But to be able to understand that, as a minimum, you need to understand this question and the answer to that. What is a maintenance check flight? So a maintenance check flight can be one of 4 forms as it is defined in this new regulation, which we find in Part Ops. So A, you can do a maintenance check flight because the AMM of the TC holder tells you to do so after you've done certain maintenance. Verification that the maintenance was done correctly, systems are calibrated correctly, systems behavior is correctly during flight. Let's take a relight in flight of an engine if that's necessary to be done. It's quite difficult to do that on ground, so you have to do a test flight, and if the AMM instructs you to do so, then that needs to happen, and we call that a maintenance check flight. Yeah, so don't get confused with calling these things test flight. They are not. We want to separate the two quite clearly. Sometimes after maintenance, and that's a common practice, especially after heavy maintenance, the operator just wants to make sure everything works as intended. Maybe not so much for safety reasons, but also passenger comfort reasons. Does the IFE system work as well during flight, etc.? So various checks are done by the operator after typically heavy maintenance has been done. So that we call a maintenance check flight as well. A maintenance organization may have, in the troubleshooting phase, have identified an issue, did the maintenance, did all the ground tests, but still there's a need to check during flight whether indeed the problem has been solved. So we call that a maintenance check flight as well. And then the last one is to assist with fault isolation or troubleshooting. The last one could be also within the first one. Fault isolation manuals, AMMs, will sometimes direct you to do certain steps within the troubleshooting. When it is the case that it falls within the AMM confines and the AMM instructs it, no need for a permit to fly. In fact, the D version, the type of maintenance check one, is the only one that needs a permit to fly. So fault isolation, troubleshooting, not described in the manuals of the manufacturer.
Just to address it from the other perspective, in the cases A, B, and C, you will always release the aircraft into service with a release form. In the first case, maybe an incomplete maintenance, but you have a release back to service. In the last case, you cannot do that, so your CFA is not valid, therefore you need the permit to fly.
And because of that, permit to fly need flight condition approval, and permit to fly as such is addressed in Part-21, our Part-21. So what has been done is to add point 16, which reads as flying an aircraft for troubleshooting purposes or to check the functioning of one or more system, part, or appliances after maintenance. So this point has been added, and it can be that the flight condition approval is approved by a DOA or applied for by a DOA. That's a possibility. Doesn't have to be. Subpart O does not say who should apply. Anybody can apply for flight condition approval or a permit to fly. In the case of specific troubleshooting flights, I would want for myself a contact with the TC holder. If the TC holder has the capability to approve flight conditions, they can do that for you. I would think that that would be a normal way of doing business, but it is not specified. Yeah. So in this case, we consider, because you need to troubleshoot, you don't know exactly what's going on, the aircraft is not flying under its CFA. That's why the permit to fly comes in. Yeah, which is different than what is possible on the 145 to do a release with maintenance open. It's a possibility that we have in the 145 rule.
As Rob mentioned, this is not only a change to Part 21, but also to the ops rules and also the AMC and guidance material to Part M. What you will find, and basically a lot what Rob just explained to you, what you will find in the AMC guidance material 2701 in Part 21 is a reference to the guidance material, especially in the AMC and to the AMC and guidance material to Part M, where this is explained in much more detail. And then you'll have the definition that you've seen on the previous slide in the OPS regulation, in Regulation 965. On the next slide, I think
we'll talk about the publication. If you want to do this, Michael,
No.
you're very welcome.
We can continue, but here, I think if you open it all at once,
Okay.
I think the important information is that everything related to maintenance check flights is spread out over several rules, not only the change to permit to fly in Part 21, where we have a little bit of AMC guidance material related to, but the main trigger of that rulemaking activity was changes to the OPS regulations, the conditions under which you can conduct permit to fly with AMC and guidance material, and then for the maintenance organizations, AMC and guidance material to Part M. And that's here where you find a lot of the explanation that Rob just gave to you, which is referenced in our AMC and guidance material. What we try to do on this slide to show you the different applicability dates, which are unfortunately not aligned. So you've learned already yesterday and today that the changes to Part 21, so 701 can be applied as of 23rd of March next year. The AMC and guidance material is already there, so we are on time for the applicability. The OPS regulation just came in, just published and entered into force a couple of weeks ago, 4th of September. It has the standard applicability date, 20 days, entry into force and applicability date, 20 days after the publication in the official journal. So we are now 24th, what day is today? Next week, the OPS regulation will become applicable. At the same time, the AMC and guidance material will become applicable, and the AMC and guidance material is not yet published. We plan to publish them in November, so you only have the version that you know from the NPA, but you will have that in place before March next year.
Thanks, Michael. Thought I'd leave the rule-making aspects to you. Any questions on maintenance check flight?
I would like to ask really on the text of the definition of this point 16. There is at the end there is after maintenance. Why you decide to say after maintenance? Because as you described the situation, the maintenance is not yet closed or is not even started. And then I think that as a purpose it can be useful, for example, also to design organization issuing STC, for example. They issue an STC, they certify it, they have then feedback from the operator, and they may have the need to perform troubleshooting flights. But if I have after maintenance in the point 16, I cannot use this.
No, in the particular case that you're mentioning, so you're still in the process of getting your STC? Okay, if you have certified the STC...
I have certified the STC. After 6 months, the operator came back and report to me something, and I would like to perform some troubleshooting on the
Yes.
STC.
So then this point is applicable, and you may design the flight conditions related for those particular flights. I understand what you're saying after maintenance. Nobody starts flying for troubleshooting after having done some jump checks. So of course you don't say, okay, there's a problem, let's fly the aircraft. You're first doing maintenance on the aircraft. Incomplete maintenance, you are unable to find the cause. As a last resort, I hope everybody understands that as a last resort, you're going to fly the aircraft to create the same situation that triggers something. You may do some measurements, you may do something else, viewing positions or other data that you will do during that flight. So in that sense, it is after maintenance, but it's not after complete maintenance. You're in the process. Any other questions on maintenance check flight? Then we'll move to the next topic on Cape 10. I think that's yours, Ralph.
I think we are very well in time. You should ask more questions. Yeah, Cape 10. Committee for Aviation Environmental Protection, that's the acronym, so everything about noise and emissions. Cape 10 means it was the 10th meeting or the 10th result. The next one will be Cape 11 regarding this aspect. What do we do wrong? That's
Troubleshooting during flight.
You made it to break it. That works? No.
I just use the keyboard.
Okay. So, to make an overview, Cape 10 resulted in the next version of the ICAO NX16, and based on this, maybe the next slide is good to explain this. Just as an overview, so based on the ICAO NX16 with volume 1, 2 and 3, volume 3 is completely new, I will come later to that. The basic regulation has been changed, so by the regulation 1139 of 2018, the basic regulation was adapted and implemented this new ICAO NX16 amendments and volumes, which became the essential requirements for environmental protection. And based on this new environmental protection essential requirements, we had to update Part-21 as well, what we did with the EU Regulation 89/7 of 2019, and this is all what we presented yesterday and today, and this is part of it. But you have to understand this is based on the basic regulation change, which is based on the ICAO NX16. So there are 3 different volumes. Volume 1 with the Amendment 12 for aircraft noise, which essentially has not changed. There are some wording changes, make it maybe a little bit nicer, better understandable from a wording perspective, but the noise requirements stays as they are, so no change here. For Volume 2, Amendment 9, this is for aircraft engine emissions. There are some changes, I will come to that, and completely new, the Volume 3, including carbon dioxide emissions, so CO2. Based on these essential requirements of ICAO NX16, which was required by the basic regulation, we implemented in Part-21 the 21B85. We talked about it slightly yesterday. The 85 is for all environmental protection requirements and included now in the B part. And now I'm coming to the 3 different volumes. So Volume 1 is for aircraft noise in Amendment 12. As I've said, no real changes, just editorial. which is now which was in 21A 18A, and now it's in 21B 85. We will get a CS36 amendment, so at Amendment 5. Actually, the CS36 is more or less empty because the requirements are already in ICAO Annex 16, but the guidance, the AMC material, will be adapted to reflect the, well, to refer more or less back to the appendices of ICAO Annex 16 for the guidance material, for the AMC material. For the engine emissions, there is a change. What has been introduced is the non-volatile particulate matter emission concentration standard. This has been introduced. It's similar to the former smoke number. So actually the particulate become smaller and smaller. But in principle, it should reflect the same. It's not perfectly the same, but it's a new method to demonstrate compliance to non-volatile particulate matter aspect, which is, again, the smokes is a little bit different. It should have covered it to 100%. It's not identical, but it's quite similar. It's required to comply with both standards, yes, the smoke number and the non-volatile particulate matter. Actually, it is planned that the NVPM will replace the smoke number in future, but this is currently not the case. So you have to comply with both. And this is valid from the 1st January 2020, not for design, but actually for production. So each engine that is produced, I come to the details later, but 1st January 2020 it starts, has to be compliant to the non-volatile particulate matter. And this is introduced in the 21B85C. It's in the 21B85B, it's the fuel venting, but this is unchanged. So regarding the AMC, there's no impact from previous amendment, and it's only the addition of AMC GM for this non-volatile particulate matter mass concentration emission certification standard. So this is now introduced in the CS34 at Amendment 3. Regarding the new applicability dates, that's what I've said, 1st January 2020, for all in production turbofan and turbojet engine types intended for propulsion at subsonic speed and with a rated thrust greater than 26.7 kilonewton. Yeah, so very soon. Now to the really new one, carbon dioxide emissions. This is in the volume 3 of ICAO Annex 16 at the first edition, and covered by 21B85D, reference to Annex 16 volume 3 part 2 for carbon dioxide. And this new requirement is applicable for jet aeroplanes above 5.7 tons and for propeller-driven aeroplanes above 8,618 kilograms. General. When it becomes applicable to what exactly, we have an extra slide. The AMC GM material latest amendment reflects actually CO2 emissions for several items, for examples of major changes, for the establishment of the TC basis, for applicable design data, for the statement of conformity, for applicable aeroplane carbon dioxide emission requirements and approval requirements. And it has impact on the Part-21 subpart D, F, and G. So for the TC RTC, for production without a POA, and for the POA. Yeah, this is just a repetition of what we said. Again, the guidance material will go back to the ICAO document where everything is written to make this applicable. Now we come to an interesting overview. When does what apply? So for the carbon dioxide requirements is applicable from 1st January 2020 for new applications for jet aeroplanes above 60 tons and above 19 passengers. But this is an automatism in this case, since the heaviest aeroplane, the Global 7500 or BD 700 type, is maximum 19 pax, and it's below 16 tons anyway. So above 16 tons, this is applicable from the 1st January 2020 for new applications, and the same for propeller-driven engine aeroplanes above 8,618 kilograms, new applications from 1st January 2020, this requirement is applicable. From the 1st January 2023, it becomes applicable for jet aeroplanes below 16 tons, so above 5.7 tons, actually where Part 25 starts. So for all Part 25 aeroplanes from the 1st January 2023, new applications, this CO2 requirement is applicable. And from the 1st January 2023 as well, for, it's called derived versions. What's meant is any change, any major change with an appreciable effect on the CO2 emissions. For jet aeroplanes above 5.7 tons, for propeller aircraft above 8,618 kilograms. So each major change with an appreciable effect on the CO2 emissions has to be compliant with this requirement from 1st January 2023, the application 1st January 2023. And independently of the design data from the 1st January 2028, each aircraft, jet above 5.7 tons, propeller above 8.6 tons, produced from the 1st January 2028 has to be compliant with the CO2 requirement. I think this provides a very good overview. Any questions to these states? Yes.
When we may change an aircraft for Chapter 2 deviated versions, is that it means, or does it mean STCs as well, or is this the TC holders item?
No, this
Previously, in the previous slide, you mentioned that the TSO, is a TS type certificate owner is responsible for, but if we add a radome or something else, we may have effect on the CO emission.
Yes, so the question is, well, yeah, the question I think is understood. The answer is, anyway, each STC major change independently who applies for a change from the 1st January 2023, when the application comes then or later, you have to be compliant with the CO2 emissions. Any further question? Okay. So this provides a good overview. The ICAO Annex 16 was published in July 2017 and was enforced from the 1st January 2018. Then the basic regulation was adapted accordingly, published on the 22nd of August 2018 and went into force on the 11th of September 2018. Based on that, we adapted Part-21. Unfortunately, this is not always at the same point of time. Published on the 3rd June this year and became applicable on the 23rd June 2019. So here the applicability date is different than for LOI, for example. There it becomes applicable on the 23rd March 2020. Here it's applicable directly on the 23rd of June this year. Then the AMCGM material to Part-21 was published on the 29th of August. And we have to adapt the CS 34, 36 for including CSCO2. And I see this was published on the 1st August 2019, and this includes CO2.
We created a new rulebook. So next to CS34 and CS36, there's a new CS code, CSCO2, since beginning of August. If you haven't seen that, if you have to comply with that, check on our website, please.
Okay. Yeah, further question.
But the CO2 is purely a fixed wing problem, no helicopters at all?
Yes. We should improve, huh? Why? No idea. Actually, we take this question. I don't know. It should be applicable to everything. I agree. What was your answer?
You're right.
Per kilometer?
Can you repeat your company, please?
We just learned Airbus helicopters has no CO2 emissions for their helicopters. So you're buying a lot of rainforest in Brasilia, or how do you do that?
But we will come back to that. We are collecting the question, as I mentioned before, and we also, after the event, sent you the questions that we have collected, especially there where we couldn't provide an answer, that we provide an answer back to you.
Who volunteers to be carbon dioxide neutral? You can raise now your hands. Okay, then we come to the next one.
So to wake you up, this is the change that I've mentioned yesterday in the beginning. We have restructured Part 21 quite a bit. So what pops up here on the left-hand side is the existing, or by now, or by 23rd of March next year, old structure of Part 21. You'll see not all of the points we've put on the slide, but these are the most relevant for the subparts that we have discussed yesterday and today. And what we want to visualize to you here on that slide is which of these provisions have changed, and especially where are those provisions where we have found something in Section A which was addressed or is addressed to the competent authority, and therefore we have moved it to Section B. You see, Section B was, at least when we're talking design, pretty empty as of today, and that will change, or that has changed with this amendment. So 21A14, demonstration of capability, as we have seen yesterday, the wording has changed. The same 21A15, and bits of that have been moved into Section B. So this obligation to EASA to develop certification specification, you'll find that now in 21B70. Special condition established by EASA will move, they are now 21B75. The TC basis, we've mentioned that a couple of times, moved from 21A17A to 21B80 for the type certification basis, for the OSD certification basis in 82, and for the environmental compatibility requirements in 21B85. All of that obligations to EASA. Demonstration of compliance, also mentioned by Rob before, 21A20 and 21A21 have changed, and the issuance of the type certificate obligation to EASA has been moved into Section B and is now 21B103. Then the inspection and test, as seen before, the wording has changed. The application for changes, the wording has changed to include level of involvement. The requirements for the approval of minor changes has changed. The requirements for approval of major changes as well. A lot of that, I think I've mentioned that to one of you in a coffee break, a lot of these word changes that we have not discussed today was to align the different subparts, that they get the same structure and the same contents and just remain their specificities. So it should be now easier to use Part 21. 21A101 is probably the only, no, not the only one, we've seen others, but the only intended inconsistency that we left in respect to who is addressed the applicant or the competent authority. Here, when it's about the determination of the certification basis for major changes, we left this in 21A 101 for the reason that this is so much harmonized with our bilateral partners, and we didn't want to change the number and didn't want to change the text apart from some editorial changes and alignments in the text. So this by the book should have been also in section B, but we maintain that in section A. Then the issuance of the change approval is moved to section B as well in 107. We've deleted, but without deleting the contents. It has merged into another provision, 21A 114. The issuance of the STC approval has changed and moved into section B, into B 111. The privileges, we discussed that yesterday and this morning quite extensively. The wordings have changed, introduction of the new possibility for additional privileges, major changes, major repairs and STCs. Obligations 265 has changed. We also saw that yesterday. The repair approval 433, the wording has changed. The issuance of the approval for EASA moved to B453. The classification of repairs, the wording has changed. 606, the issuance of an ETSO authorization also moved into section B, into now 480, B480. The scoping 701, which we've just seen before, the new purpose for a permit to fly has been introduced. 21B70, the approval of changes to the type certificate was deleted and integrated in 21, help me, issuance of the TC, B103. Then we've introduced in green here 21A 432C. There was no provision on the application for a design repair in the existing Part 21, so we wanted to ensure consistency with the other subparts and also give you the certainty what you need to submit when applying for design repair approval. Very similar, there was no provision on the certification basis for repair approvals. Also that we introduced in 21B 450. And also similar to that, the certification basis for STCs was not, there was nothing existing, so we inserted that in 109. And in 105 for changes. And then the big point, level of involvement, introduced in 21B 100. So this just as an idea of what has changed, the extent to what it has changed. I think the easiest, if you are searching for a provision that you know was addressing EASA, you can't find it in the section A, you know it has to go to section B. And most of the other changes are triggered by trying to bring in consistency into the different subparts. This is barely readable, but in order to support you, go into the AMC guidance material document that we've published 2 weeks ago. You'll find there a correlation table. So this animation you'll find there in a table format, which part of which point has been moved within section A or to section B, where the wording has changed. So that's visible from the correlation table. Please use this to ease your work in the future. Do you have any questions so far? So we are now at the end of the contents of what we wanted to present to you. What is remaining is an overview of the applicability dates.